Yeah.
So you brought up so many poems that I have. So I'm not going to go into my fairyography at the moment anyway. I'd like
It
to.
did make me notice your fairy wing
Yes.
earrings when you
And
said that.
this, yes. So this is my first time publicly going full on fairy because
Let's
of your
go.
kind invitation.
And nobody wants a half fairy. We want full fairy or no fairy at all.
Exactly. And we don't
Go
want
all
it
the
to be
way.
unfairy. So, but rather than do that particular poem, my fairy's tale, I'd rather do one called The Time of Our Lives, because it talks about the redundancy of the idiocy that you were talking about. Don't you see this obvious thing? Evidently not. You're sleepwalking. So I wrote a poem.
Aldous Huxley called that sleepwalking somnambulance. I always thought that was a good word.
It is a good word. Somnambulism.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many good words.
There are so many good words, I know.
You know Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith.
I know of him. I haven't met him, but I imagine that connection will be made at some point.
Well, I adore him.
Yeah.
And I was his student in the early 90s and his editor. He wasn't writing books then. It was more articles. So, okay. At the end of one of the year-long classes, we had to do a creative expression of what this closer walk with God means to you. And I wanted to braid the language, which I used to do a lot, which is what I called linking words through rhyme and sense. And I didn't think I could still do it. I had very little faith in my own intelligence. And finally, the time was coming. And the reason we have death, I realize, is because without deadlines, we wouldn't do anything.
Yes, indeed.
And so I went to my favorite wilderness park in Malibu, where I'm often alone, 550 acres of trees in ardor embrace. That's not the right form of the word. In sensual embrace with stones. They grow sections out of their trunk to embrace stones. It's such a powerful place. So I walked and I told my elemental friends, well, actually, it was a lizard, a big lizard in a pathway. And I asked if I could sit by it, and I was given permission. And we sat for an extended period of time, and I poured out my angst that I want to be able to create, and I want to be able to braid language again. And I don't know if I have the capability. I don't think to do a very good job. And I took notes on what I heard. I don't know where they are, but what lasted in my memory is I heard through this vehicle, quality is never the issue. Authenticity is. And I thought, well, I can do that. And so I wrote a poem called First Person Singular. And I didn't think it was very good because it rhymed. And sophisticated poems didn't at that time. And I thought it was another indication of my elemental or elementary nature. But in any case, I did recite it. It was well received. The president of a New Age label, Higher Octave Music, a fellow named Matthew Marshall, asked if I wanted to do an album of my verse for their label. And I'd only written that one poem. Plus, I had Marijuana Sutra from 12 years prior. So, but I said yes. And so first I got 4,000 to do it. I didn't know how long it would take. And then it just grew to 10,000. I got from this one poem, First Person Singular, which gave my vision of what the world looked like when I came into it, which I'll share just like page 1.
Please,
Okay?
please.
Thank you. This life is like a shadow play, the flickering of night and day, through which illusions in our minds are manifest and intertwined into a web that few evade, though they see through the masquerade. When I was small, I felt so certain I could peek behind the curtain, and I was sure what would appear would be some master puppeteer who pulled the strings and wrote the dance of orchestrated happenstance. The world appeared, for all its noise, like stage sets made of tinker toys, where people played prescripted roles like lost and unawakened souls who hardly ever came alive, which helps the culture to survive. This haunting specter made me feel lives don't unfold, they just unreal. As numberless non-entities, identical identities, are merged into a single herd, manipulated by the word, and driven by insane obsessions to sell their souls for their possessions. And all are taught to genuflect, to knowledge and to intellect, to follow the majority, to kowtow to authority, to worship youth and beauty like some consecrated duty, and to treasure monetary wealth more than the earth and life itself. And everyone I met pretended this made sense, and were offended when I told them I perceived that all of them had been deceived, for everything material's essentially ethereal, which means we need to pay attention to the source of this dimension. I suggested every action that we take for satisfaction might be merely metaphorical for current and historical desires of the human being to unify with the unseen creative force that animates, that elevates, intoxicates, and fascinates the human mind, enabling us to leave behind the torment of our daily cares. When such a source is reached with prayers, it's always transformational, quite healing and sensational. But often people want that splendor, but aren't willing to surrender egocentric motivation for divine illumination. Since no one seemed to get my point, I'd sit alone and smoke a joint and simply let my mind unhinge while speculating from the fringe about a novel paradigm that blends the human with sublime. Trapped in this world, I thought that I would scrape my head against the sky if I allowed myself to be what Spirit had in mind for me. So I avoided normal life. I'd no career. I'm no one's wife. I stayed on the periphery of regular society for fear that if I drew too close, that I too might go comatose. So it goes on for another 2 pages. We'll skip over to a different one. That's the poem that got me the opportunity to write an album of my verse.
I understand why. Beautiful poem.
Thank you. And so I didn't know what I'd write about. So I thought, since people love horror, why don't I just hold up a mirror to the times? So I wrote a piece called The Time of Our Lives. And Matthew, it was during, what's his name? Clinton and Gore were new in office. So there was some optimism. And so he looked at the poem, he read it, and he said, kind of dark, isn't it? And so I put it away for 30 years. I had no tolerance for criticism, having had way too much of it growing up. So then I shared it. And so, so I wrote 2 poems venting my rage about the insanity of the system and how people are so gullible, like guppies, I guess. So I wrote The Time of Our Lives. I mostly have it memorized. I believe I may have it all memorized, but I will have this with me.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll wait till I need it. We're always tense about time, whether future, present, or past. We try to beat it, kill it, waste it, yet fear it will not last. We fret about tomorrow and then mourn for yesterday, and thus we live our lives in sorrow and increasing disarray while still believing sudden windfalls could bring everything our way. Night falls, so day breaks, and each morning we awake, and through the week days undertake to earn our living till we make it to the weekend, weekend, just in time to catch our breath, and certainly to get deep rest. We run our lives on deadlines and then wonder why they're dismal, and why all the daily headlines grow increasingly abysmal. But it really isn't hard to figure why there's so much fighting. For when life is this lackluster, death seems all the more exciting. And since malice and brutality is what we call reality, then callous immorality can grant one immortality. We long to live forever, but we don't live in the moment. And we hope to be so clever as to wrangle a postponement when we fear our death's arrival, for we think our soul survival is dependent on the likelihood of physical revival. We are timeless beings living in time. We are deathless beings living and dying. We are human beings, essentially divine, living mundane lives that were meant to be sublime. We want to grow, just not right now. We want to change, just not too much. We want the truth, downplayed somehow. Let's all get close, but just not touch. We think we've all the time on earth, what little time's remaining, and believe we're of too little worth to spend that time refraining from the various, I just got off track. The mind went so. The various addictions that we use for anesthesia, which then render us unconscious in a deepening amnesia, such that problems we're avoiding grow to staggering dimensions, since that's what it takes to captivate our wandering attentions. In hoping for a second coming to prevent us from succumbing to the suicidal siren's call, we're hastening a harder fall. We would have to be delirious to overlook how serious this is, or else lack passion to survive. But we're both numbed by the immensity and hooked on the intensity, because it helps us know that we're alive. And thus we face this dire emergency with little sense of urgency, desensitized by our routines and all the tragedies we've seen. So it's no wonder For vacation, we indulge in recreation, since it takes tremendous voltage just to give us some sensation. Since we're wandering unawakened in the Eden we've forsaken, all the while perplexed about the dismal turn that things have taken. We live like paupers in paradise, and through the bars of our paper prison, project upon the universe the narrow and distorted vision by which we all are scrutinized, then analyzed and hypnotized until the world's so sanitized, denatured, and dehumanized that love and trust are violated, spirit is annihilated, and ruined lives are just the casual ties that the pace of the race has liquidated. For we run the human race like it's some deadly competition, wherein everyone is driven by their greed and blind ambition to amass the greatest wealth and fight for number one position against everybody else whom we declare the opposition. Which is why we're here 2,000 years later, and we still haven't learned to love our neighbor. But full of judgment and begrudgment, speak our peace, then draw our saber, waving it with righteous pride, convinced that God is on our side, while we proceed like holy terrors to decimate God's human errors. This labyrinth of insanity created by humanity is stupefying all our youth, who go insane in search of truth, since rarely do they ever find a grown-up who is of sound mind. But trapped in city idiocies, inequities that hideously beget the grim scenarios of ghettos, slums, and barrios, our children dance to violence, romance the deadly heroine, while all that they are dreaming of is dying, literally, for love. Like towering trees to toothpicks whittled, our children's souls are thus belittled. Yet still we make our foolish choices, drowning out our children's voices, unconcerned that they are crying while the earth and air are dying. For we are quick to sacrifice their future for a paltry price. For nothing ever could suffice a parasite in paradise. We are an idiot savant. We've a grand intellect to flaunt, but only just the smallest ration of deep wisdom and compassion. And there is really nothing smart about a brain without a heart, although it seems to be the ultimate seduction, because it grants us unchecked power, but just to bring our darkest hour, as it endows us with a genius for destruction. It has brought us to this precipice. Below us looms a deep abyss, in which our dreams may all get smashed, our children's legacy be dashed. And yet we have no other course unless we recognize our source, because the ego thinks it's greater than its own divine creator. And if ego wins, then Geo spins into a grim oblivion, and no one knows how deep it goes, or if we will return again. it rarely comes to our attention that this is just a dream dimension. But we wake now, or no doubt lingers. The life stream will slip through our fingers. Thank
That was
you.
beautiful. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
I've often pondered that ego, translated in the Latin as I am, but actually ego is referring to exactly the opposite, because it's referring to the part of us that says I am not. It's the part of us that's declaring separation from our source, whereas I am is participating in the grand I am
Yes.
of everything. And it's almost as if the very word itself plays a trick.
The word ego?
Yeah.
It does. You just spin it around and you have geo. We're meant to go from egocentric to geocentric.
Yeah. And, I've referenced him a few times, but, again, my teacher, Rabbi Gaffney, he talks about the evolution of man from Homo sapiens, the thinking man, of mental, the mental deification of what our potential is, to Homo amor, which is,
Beautiful.
the man of the heart, the man of
Yes.
love. And I say man in the mankind sense of the word, obviously.
Yes, I know.